This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. Hi. What do you guys want to talk about? This is such good shit. Thanks, guys. Back to you.
All right. It has officially been 72 years since we covered territorial wrestling. And by that, I purely mean 2 weeks. It is Friday. And my schedule is back to quote-unquote normal. Ready to block out some time here and talk about some classic wrestling we watched over the week. It's good to get back into some of this. I have noticed the Friday shows seem to be the more popular podcasts I do on the channel. Guess a lot of people aren't too fond of the retro WWF stuff we're doing right now. That's very weird. I would have thought it would have been the other way around. Apparently people really like some of this territory coverage. It's kind of cool. Guess everybody's got their preferences. So before we dive into the fun stuff, make sure you all subscribe, comment, and like for me. YouTube and Rumble are the platforms we host every week. I like to keep pushing Rumble viewership more than anything because people seem to finally be migrating over there. And they're still a long way from being suitable competition to YouTube, just because of the longevity. But I really noticed my Rumble viewership going up more significantly than YouTube. And for all I know, I may have already been shadow banned on YouTube. If you don't know what that means, Google it. So, well, the only thing I can really do is keep pursuing the content. As long as I'm permitted to upload on both platforms, I'm going to keep doing it. In any case, what do you say we get going with a little bit of this classic wrestling? Getting right back into the swing of things with Crockett TV. So what did we miss? Apparently we missed Dusty Rhodes sucker punching Gary Hart. That appears to be it. Oh yeah, and Dusty got a haircut too. And he still wants Ronnie Garvin. He's still out for blood. So we're actually coming up on a string of really interesting shows over the next few weeks here. A lot of these TV shows are getting the time cut almost in half. I looked ahead. I think next week, show runtime is something like 38 minutes. Probably not even worth reviewing the show if we're being honest. You know, this week was only an hour. I never knew what the competition was on TV around this point. You know, whether they were preempted by sports or what other big events were going on at the time. But I have noticed, you know, there's a few weeks during the year where they'll have a string of like 3 or 4 shows and maybe only run like 40 minutes to an hour. Sometimes a little under an hour. I usually presume it's sports related, but I don't know. Remember when Nitro used to get preempted by that stupid dog show? And people say wrestling fans are morons. So the first match on TV this week is Mike Rotunda and Rick Steiner versus Bob Emery and Brad Holiday. Without even being teased, I'm watching Steiner and Rotunda tag back and forth throughout the match. Looking at the way Steiner's carrying himself versus how the rest of the group functioned at this point, you could just tell they're totally turning Rick Steiner babyface soon. Like, he's out there just having the time of his life beating up these job guys. Big old smile on his face. He's doing all these subtle crowd-pleasing spots, like, giving one of the guys 4 power slams in a row. Each one trying to hoist the guy even higher into the air. I'm like, there's no way they're going to be able to keep this guy a heel for much longer. He is way too entertaining. Meanwhile, Mike Rotunda gets in there and does a suplex. I'm like, fuck off. Tag Rick back in. So they get the win after Steiner hits a belly-to-belly. And then we get this great Abbott and Costello sketch with both guys at the booth. Tony's trying to talk about the Dr. Death Mike Rotunda TV title match coming up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is Dr. Death's hometown. And while Tony's trying to put over the TV belt, Rick Steiner walks over and holds the Florida Heavyweight title up for everybody to see, which Tony basically responds by going, "Yes, the Florida Heavyweight title still exists." And Rotunda's trying to cut his heat promo, saying he can easily beat Dr. Death, to which Steiner interrupts and goes, "Anybody he can beat, I can beat too." Which led to this awesome back and forth exchange where Rotunda holds the TV belt up and goes, "This is the belt we're talking about, dude. Dr. Death does not want the Florida Heavyweight title. Nobody gives a shit about that belt." To which Steiner retorts by going, "Mine's shinier and bigger." Which legitimately got a pop out of everybody in the studio and Tony Schiavone. And, I'm sitting there like, hey, you know what? The dog-faced gremlin's got a point here. His belt is shinier and bigger than Rotunda's stupid silver-looking TV belt. Who could possibly care about that worthless sack of shit? I want the gold that Rick has. That was his justification. His belt was shinier. Therefore, only in the mind of Rick Steiner, it is more consequential. Never mind the fact that everybody forgot that stupid belt existed in the first place. Rick wants us all to know that his belt is gold and big. Therefore, it is better than Mike Rotunda's. Amazing. So then they bickered about Syracuse and Michigan State until Kevin Sullivan finally separated the both of them. Rick Steiner ruled in this promo. I don't give a fuck what anybody says. Because who's going to argue with that unhinged animal? He's telling us his belt is bigger and better than Mike Rotunda's. I believe him. I'm not going to try to pick a fight with the guy. I mean, we're splitting hairs by that point. I want to live my life healthy and mobile, not confined to an iron lung. So then my brain temporarily malfunctioned when I saw the next match was the Sheep Herders versus Tony Suber and Brett Holiday. I'm like, am I having a stroke? Did we not just see Brett Holiday wrestle in the previous match? No, apparently that was Brad Holiday. Great. So we have another Mulkey Brothers knockoff here. Two indistinguishable twin brothers who you could barely tell apart. And this is even worse because their names are so goddamn similar. Which one's Brett? Which one's Brad? Who knows and who cares? Match was what it was. It's a sheep herders match. They're usually boring and very uninteresting. That's exactly what this was. I mainly honed into JR's commentary because he was actually talking about a few interesting points when it came to the current tag scene. Talking about how the Horsemen are still looking for fresh new challengers to wrestle for the World Tag Belts. Not named the Midnight Express, obviously. But how they're trying to set their sights on actual tag teams. And not two singles guys thrown together like Sting and Nikita, for example. Now remember, they only teased the idea of the Midnights and the Horsemen a few weeks ago when JC did that studio promo. You know, just kind of throwing the germ of an idea out there, but not saying outright that the Midnights want to actually challenge Tully and Arn for the gold. But, well, as we found out later on in the show, things did escalate in that program. Brad Armstrong wrestled Joe Cruz. This is another great JR line here. Early on, he's talking about how Brad's been seeking legal counsel in order to negotiate contract deals. Trying to figure out the best course of action to earn himself a world title shot down the road. And of course, JR's talking about how he can't get into logistics about how the negotiating went because he never studied law or prepared for the bar. To which he goes, I've been to a few bars. Never studied for one. That Jim Ross was a clever thinker. Always knew how to throw out good elbow nudgers. So Brad did what I can merely best describe as the prototypical Brad Armstrong match. He worked a dude's arm. He chain wrestled. He worked over the same arm a little longer. I think I fell asleep. And he eventually won with the Russian leg sweep. I'm telling you, man. If they ever developed a video game that included Brad Armstrong as a playable character, his entire offensive arsenal would consist of the following three moves. Russian leg sweep, drop kick, arm wringer. God bless him. Every time I watch a Brad Armstrong match, I'm reminded this guy was a remarkably great athlete. Terribly boring to watch in the ring. Unless he was working a big show match with a top heel, you could call every one of his squashes before the bell even rings. So one-dimensional. And then we came back for Kevin Sullivan versus JC Wilde, which was also every prototypical Kevin Sullivan match you've ever seen. Only it was the polar opposite of Brad's TV matches. In the first minute alone, we had the following sequence of events take place. Jumpstart before the bell. Job guy gets dumped out to the floor. Sullivan creams him in the back of the head with a folding chair. Runs him into the podium. Picks up and throws said interview podium directly at his face. Then they did some other stuff and eventually he won with a running stampede in the corner. So it was basically 60 seconds of everything I just mentioned, plus another 15 seconds of him actually hitting his finish. I can only imagine what it was like if you were one of the job guys that got booked to work with Kevin Sullivan that week. Hope your cardio's good, son, because you're going to need it to keep up with this guy. There is no downtime. Everything in a Sullivan match is car crash ass kicking from bell to bell. Non-stop. And the same goes for his promos too. Just non-stop, what the fuck is this guy talking about dialogue? Every time I listen to a Kevin Sullivan promo, it's like I want to set a timer. I want to see how long it actually takes before he completely loses me in his train of thought. I think he made it about halfway past the minute mark here before he just totally went off the rails. He started talking about how he used to believe in the American dream, but then he went to Asia and met with the Habuda Dean. And that is when he learned that the American dream is dead. You know, at first I was like, okay, I'm with you so far. But once he began talking about the lady with the third eye, laying with her in bed for 13 days and 13 nights, something about walking the streets of Gonka with a blind man and eating monkey brains, that is when I said, okay, I have completely lost the plot. I have no idea what the fuck this guy's talking about. I was just watching JR in the background get grossed out by hearing Sullivan talk about eating monkey brains. And eventually he got back on topic and told Patty that the Tower of Doom was not the end of their issue. To which I screamed and asked, why? And then he left a folded up note with JR. It should also be noted, Kevin Sullivan pulled out this piece of paper from his ring trunks. It was tucked in the front. You know, where the junk lays. And JR had no issue claiming possession of this note. He's like, well, got the note. It is warm and sticky, but it's very important. We must address this at a later date. Because the world must know what message Sullivan is trying to conceal. So, well, for the record, we never found out what the note said. I guess they're saving that for a rainier day. We did get a pre-taped Lex Luger promo where he tackled the rematch negotiations with Flair. He said that Flair wanted 1 million different contract stipulations to get the match re-signed, including several limousines, personal catering, and private jets. But Luger didn't want any of that. The only thing he wanted was a fair one-on-one match where there must be a winner, with a title on the line, and the match can't be stopped because of blood. It goes until there's a winner and a loser. And, well, of course, it wouldn't be a Lex Luger promo if he didn't take his shirt off and flex for the camera. I think that's just built into the cake at this point. It is one of the rare times I've seen Luger out there with a plain wife beater on. It was very weird. The only thing missing was the sauce stain. I mean, the guy's still over like wildfire, despite that disastrous booking finish in Baltimore. You know, it's still not quite on the same level as it was prior to the Great American Bash. But somehow those Luger fans are still roaring. That is quite a devoted fan base. And then we came back for the epitome of a buffer standby match. Why in the fuck this was booked, I could not tell you. When I saw the next match on this card was Tommy Angel and Bob Riddle versus Mike Jackson and Kurt Thompson, I was ready to flip my goddamn computer off the desk. I was gone for 2 weeks. Did not review NWA television for 2 whole weeks. And I come back. This is the kind of shit they're throwing at me. Prime time cable television, folks. 4 job guys. With poor Mike Jackson having to carry the load, essentially. And, like, that's the thing that sucks about it. Mike Jackson was easily the best worker of the 4 involved. The problem was nobody else could feed for him. So all it did was reduce Jackson down to everybody else's level. And in all fairness, was it a bad match? No, not really. It had some okay moments, I guess. I actually thought Kurt Thompson looked pretty good in there at times. I'm surprised he didn't catch more of a break in the wrestling business. He wasn't a remarkably talented in-ring worker, but the guy had some size. He could do some stuff. You'd have figured WWF would have jumped on a guy like that, just given the physique. And he just sort of faded into oblivion. But, again, it's just a random underneath match in the middle of the show. And this is not like Midsouth, where you would actually see this stuff on a week-by-week basis, where they would actually try to feature the green guys and show you their progress as the months go by. And we're so accustomed to seeing top guy versus job guy on NWA studio shows. When I see something like this pop up, my instinct is, all right, whose car broke down? I would definitely say the right team won here. Thompson and Jackson were clearly the better tag team. Although, what's that really saying? Does it go anywhere in storyline? No. Just like Mike Jackson's Alabama Junior Heavyweight title reign didn't go anywhere. And for those of you asking, the Alabama Junior Heavyweight what? Exactly. So that was followed by an almost totally inaudible Ric Flair promo. I have no idea where they taped this thing. Apparently out of a phone booth. So Ric Flair's talking about the rematch with Luger for the world title. Whole thing sounded like he had a gas mask over his face. Could barely hear a word the guy said. Fans are totally drowning him out in the background. He basically said he's sick of hearing the fans chant for Luger. He says he's tired of thinking about Luger's name. He wants this all to be done and over with. When Luger steps back into the ring with Flair, he's putting his destiny and his reputation on the line. To which I noted, and how? That reputation was quite tarnished after the fact. Somehow they're building up to this like it's the last time Luger and Flair are ever going to face off for the gold. But they're clearly advertising something for the month of August between these two. Yet these guys end up wrestling again at Starrcade at the end of the year. So I have no idea what stipulations they were pushing at the time. But it's definitely not the last time we see Luger and Flair in the ring together. And then we had an infamous classic here. And I only know about this because I happened to stumble across a Brian and Vinny YouTube clip where they actually synced up the video feed to review this match. I think they were also doing NWA Crockett reviews back in the day before they just stopped. I don't know what happened there. In any case, it is Chris Champion versus Dawn Valentine. And right out of the gate, again, I have to ask, what the fuck is with these studio squashes this week? Did all the stars get kidnapped by ninjas in the parking lot or something? Where the hell is everybody? We're more than halfway into the show by this point. We have not seen any of the Horsemen. We have not seen Sting. We have not seen Luger. We have not seen Dusty. We have not seen the Midnights. We have not seen the Road Warriors. We have not seen the Fantastics. We have not seen any of the top stars in any capacity. The only semblance of star power we have seen on the show at this point has been the Varsity Club. So 37 minutes into the program, I'm watching Dawn Valentine and Chris Champion after I just got done watching a tag match with 4 underneath job guys. And I'm not going to be able to replicate the review that Brian Alvarez did on this thing. I will just tell you right now, when you watch that clip and you hear Brian and Vinny openly mock Don Valentine and call him the worst jobber of all time, they are not exaggerating. I know sometimes wrestling fans are prone to hyperbole. He was that atrocious. This guy fucked up everything. And it's important to remember this too. Chris Champion was legit on the show for well over a year because of a car crash. His entire left arm was bruised and scarred from the surgery he had done. By all accounts, that guy was lucky to be alive. So he's already kind of unnerved getting back in the ring to begin with. You know, his partner, Sean Royal, is gone from the wrestling business by this point. So he's out there by himself, trying to pry a watchable match out of this fucking Don Valentine. There's a spot where Champion goes to thrust kick Valentine. Not only did Valentine not register the kick and or sell it, he then took a bump that looked like he was rolling over to play dead. From that point, you could tell Champion was long over it. They finger fucked around some more with terrible looking spots. All of Valentine's bumps looked like he was packaged in a mile of bubble wrap. And the finish is just iconic. The receipt of a fucking lifetime. After everything Valentine did to screw up spot after spot after spot after spot in this match, finally Champion had enough. He said, "Fuck this asshole." And he punted this doofus right in the jaw as hard as humanly possible. And Don Valentine sold that shit. He sold like he'd been blistered in the head with a rifle. Down he went. Chris Champion covers him for the 3 count. Abhorrent. This was easily the single worst squash match I have seen in NWA history. Chris Champion versus Don Valentine. I'm surprised Turner Network didn't pull the plug right there. If I did star ratings, that was an honest-to-God negative 5-star squash. Holy fuck. Honest to God, this is one of those matches where you only air on TV to singly point out how horrible a guy is. It had to be a rib. Dusty said, "Baby, we keeping this ship. This is going to go down in the annals of all-time bad wrestling matches, Daddy. If we going out of business by the end of the year, we're going out in style." You know what I'm saying? So, hey, speaking of star power, we finally got some of it on the show this week. We had 2/3 of the Midnight Express present at the studio. Sweet Stan apparently came down with a cold. Air quotes around that. JC said the only reason he wasn't here this week was that he got too many nurses' phone numbers. So he's still going to be busy for a few more days. So we get corny and beautiful Bobby at the booth, poking fun at the Horsemen, and actually being a lot more deliberate with the trash talking, which again had apparently escalated pretty quickly over the last couple weeks. Last we left, Cornette only alluded to the idea of getting in the ring with Tully and Arn. But this week, now they pretty much laid the groundwork, saying that Tully and Arn rent their limousines from the same company that Cornette's mom owns. And while they love that night lifestyle, with all the drinking and partying, they're all used to being carried by the Midnights and flung back into bed for the night. And while Arn's unconscious, having liquor dumped over his head, Tully's begging Stan for all the ladies' phone numbers. He also took some shots at JJ here, saying the last time the Horsemen were traveling to one of the local live events, they got lost on the way home. And that's because they weren't reading a road map. They were reading JJ's varicose veins. So, yeah. They have really dialed up the intensity here. You know, again, it's so unfortunate they only really launched into Chapter 1 of this feud before things totally blew up in September. There were so many angles and so many directions they could have taken this thing. And the subtle babyface turn for the Midnights here, while not direct in any way, yeah, you could kind of tell the people really wanted to cheer for Cornette by the end of this. They were kind of digging his jokes. Now, personally, I was never the biggest fan of the babyface Midnight Express. I thought it kind of killed Cornette's promos in 89 and 90. It's not to say they were bad, but like the whole appeal of JC's promos were the witty banter and the underhanded pot shots. You know, you flip the guy babyface where you force the fans to cheer for him. It's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater at that point. At least by this stage, it was still mostly heel versus heel with the way it was being built on TV. I guess the Midnights just sort of became the de facto babyfaces by the time it all concluded. Then, of course, everything with the original Midnight Express that led into December that year. But again, not trying to get ahead of myself. So that led to Beautiful Bobby's singles match with Gary Phelps. The most blaring, going through the motions Bobby Eaton match I've ever seen. Dude. Bobby showed up at the studio this week and said, if I give 15% effort, it's still too much. He did absolutely nothing in this match. And he still outperformed Gary Phelps by leaps and bounds. He did one diving knee drop off the top rope, which led to the subsequent pinfall. Everything else was him holding Phelps in a stationary headlock, basically preventing the guy from moving in any direction. And I totally get it. He was probably looking at the card lineup this week and said, this is the best we can do. This is my competition for the week. Well, I'm certainly not bending over backwards for that shitty card. I mean, he did have to follow Dawn Valentine and Chris Champion. He was probably pissed. So then we pitched back to the booth momentarily for a JJ promo, kind of touching on some of Cornette's commentary from earlier. He had a giant visible scar covering his right eye. Had to be a really recent blade job. Looked gnarly. In any case, he spoke about the Midnights. He said that he and the rest of the Horsemen have a lot of respect for what they've done in the business, but they also don't entirely follow the same paths when it comes to outside lifestyles. The last time Cornette invited the Horsemen over for drinks, they had to drink their champagne through a straw in those rinky-dink glasses to make sure they didn't piss off Mama Cornette. And of course, JJ only really gets out that line before Cornette interrupts him. They start going back and forth over the World Tag Title situation. JJ tells Corny that he's seen his attitude whenever the Horsemen show up at the Bash Tour events. He sees Cornette gritting his teeth over the fact that the Horsemen get to hold those World Tag Titles and carry them with pride everywhere they go. Meanwhile, Cornette fires back and tells JJ that the only reason they still have those belts is that they'd never given the Midnights a chance to wrestle for them. If they did get a title shot, the Horsemen would be packing those belts inside individual cases and carrying them around for the Midnights like a bunch of pack mules. They basically round out the conversation with JJ telling Cornette that he better keep that tennis racket at home. To which Corny tells JJ that he's going to keep his racket close by, because we all know how things go when JJ's wearing those $12.99 loafers at ringside. Somehow one of those winds up being the difference maker to guarantee the Horseman victory. So Cornette's going to keep an equalizer of his own, just in case. And, well, it's definitely the first time we've seen these two engage on TV in a confrontational manner, at least from the material we reviewed thus far. It was certainly a hot face-off. The crowd really wanted to see these two come to blows, even though they're both the managers, and that's the funny thing. You know, like I said earlier, it's still primarily a heel versus heel feud. Crowd's basically picking and choosing who they want to cheer for here. Which top heel team is more relatable? Which one do the fans have a deeper attachment to? Because they both get moderate to heavy babyface pops depending on the venue. I mean, I always argue the Horsemen have essentially been babyfaces since '87 by and large. You know, with the Midnights, that was something that came to the forefront more in '88. I think once the fans came to realize how truly great they were as a tag team. But this is all well done. No complaints. Other than not getting to see Stan wrestle this week, unfortunately. I'm sure he was living it up in that hospital bed, though. Al Perez versus Rick Allen. I will simply review it as follows. Earlier on, when JR mentioned that Al Perez was going to be wrestling on this show, there was one singular fan in the crowd that went, ugh. That is the word I wrote down when I saw the graphic come up. Al Perez versus Rick Allen. Ugh. UGH. Then we had Gary Hart cutting a heel promo on Dusty at the booth, which eventually turned into a Gary Hart, Kevin Sullivan heel promo on Dusty. And, you know, Perez just kind of stood in the backdrop and looked dopey. It was kind of funny, though. Right at the end, Sullivan looks at Hart and goes, "You said something about Texas earlier. What was the joke?" And Hart goes, "The only thing worse than one Texan is two Texans." And Sullivan lets out this hearty heel laugh, and they all walk off camera together. That was funny. I love it when heels laugh at their own bad comedy. Oh yeah, and they also reference Dick Murdoch. He's a babyface now. He and Dusty are just on the same page again. After we had just heard Murdoch calling Dusty every bad name in the book a few weeks ago, when he and Sullivan were preparing to wrestle Dusty and the Sheik in Detroit, now all of a sudden, Dickie's just a good old Southern boy again. Okay then. Yay, completely indiscriminate babyface turns off camera that are never explained. Gotta love it. So we heard a little more from Dusty in his pre-taped interview on one of the syndicated programs. He told Gary Hart that there's a lot of pain, blues, and agony headed his way. All Dusty's thought about for weeks now was what he's going to do to Ronnie Garvin and Gary Hart for what they did in Baltimore, turning on Dusty and leaving him for dead. But Dusty's got a former colleague by his side now, the Texas Outlaw, Dick Murdoch. And again, how? I'm not entirely sure. He is just a babyface again. But damn it all, Dusty's willing to let bygones be bygones. Now he and Dickie are going to take the fight to Ronnie and Al Perez. Which then led to this bewildering squash match where Murdoch is supposed to be wrestling an underneath guy. Meanwhile, Dusty's just casually hanging out at ringside on the floor. At which point, he begins interfering and ramming the guy into the timekeeper's table, kicking him, stomping him, beating him up. Just being a total douchebag. Teddy Long looking around like, well, you know, Dusty gonna be Dusty. He's the booker. What am I gonna do? So Murdoch wins with a brainbuster. And then Dusty's in there less than 5 seconds later, dropping elbows and just beating the shit out of the jobber some more. I'm like, this guy's a babyface, correct? Because this is not befitting of heroic-like qualities. It was funny. It was silly. I don't know if that was the intent. And then, right as Dick Murdoch is trying to explain more in depth how this out-of-the-blue babyface turn occurred, because we all have questions, we're all curious, he's talking about how things got a little out of control in Detroit. Sullivan and Sheik trying to go after Dusty's eye, and then, boom, they cut to commercial, and they skip out on the rest of Dickie's dialogue. I was like, of all places to cut out, at the precise moment we are about to hear the backstory of how Dick Murdoch became a good guy, I guess it was ever so important we needed to fit a Rip Morgan Bear Collie match in before the show went off air. God forbid we didn't get to see Rip Morgan wrestle Big Bear fucking Collie. Yeah, that Dick Murdoch explanation can wait another week. Oh, by the way, him mentioning the heels going after Dusty's eye in an attempt to hurt him in storyline. Yeah, that did not age well. And as for Rip Morgan and Bear Collie, the match went 90 seconds. It was absolutely horrible. And Morgan won with a middle rope elbow smash. Again, why we needed to see this match, I have no clue. But hey, they bought the fucking airtime. All the major stars apparently decided to go on vacation for the week. So they looked around and said, is Rip Morgan doing anything this week? Well, he is now. He's working, brother. Yeah. This show was really, really bad. I didn't really think about it much until I just went back and recapped everything. And it's funny because, like, I didn't hate the show when I saw it. I recalled it wasn't very memorable. There wasn't anything remotely interesting that happened. Aside from that horrible match with Chris Champion and Dawn Valentine. But, like, that was the major issue with the show. The big surrounding question about the whole thing. Where were the stars? You know, outside the Midnight Express and arguably the Varsity Club. I mean, the commentators kept telling us all throughout the show, August is going to be a big month, people. A lot of hot action coming your way. With all the top names and all the top stars. You don't want to miss it. Yeah, about those top stars. Are they going to be here next week? Stay tuned. So now we move on to the best segment on the Friday podcast. Midsouth Wrestling. Or at least what I consider my favorite segment of the week. So, boy, there's a lot of stuff we've missed over the last couple weeks. A couple significant dates that have come up since we last reviewed an episode of Midsouth. The Superdome show that took place on July 24th, I believe it was. And of course, those are all held in New Orleans. That is where we crown new Mid-South Tag Team Champions. Belts that are now held by Hacksaw, Jim Duggan, and Magnum TA. Which was still not quite as legendary as the Wrestling 2 Magnum TA tag team from '84. But that's a pretty big accomplishment for Magnum. Being so new to the business by this period. He's already won himself some championship gold. And likewise, on a more sad note, JYD is no longer the North American champion. Finally dropped the strap to Hacksaw Butch Reed. But that doesn't mean they weren't going to do everything to babyface the fuck out of the dog. Because you know Mid-South. We had a huge presentation of sorts where the dog was recognized with, and this is a direct quote, "Honorary Citizenship of New Orleans," as presented by the mayor of New Orleans at the time. And it's one of those things where it's hard for me to really jot down the details of what happened here, just because Bill Watts spent the entire time rattling off a bunch of sports names and famous townspeople in the area. I had no fucking clue who half these people were. But Watts is just mentioning everybody like, well, of course. Everybody knows who these people are. And the whole premise is, all the local citizens love the dog. Talking about what an inspiration he's been to all the Utes. And they want Dog to continue the great work he's been doing. I mean, with all the young kids, doing all those celebrity appearances, and being a signature voice for the New Orleans population. And again, this all stems shortly after JYD just dropped the North American strap. So you can tell they're kind of in damage control mode here, just to make sure they don't lose any appeal with the market. Quick, we got to pump up the dog and make him look like the most likable guy on the planet. Award ceremonies, go. There's no time. But it was cool. Dog looked a little, dare I say, less than enthused to be there. It's always hard to get a read on the Junkyard Dog, especially around this time. You know, we're still a little over a year out from him walking out of the territory and leaving Watts high and dry. Even around this period in '83, you could tell something was off. And I'm not just referring to the drugs. But getting back on the topic of TA and Duggan real briefly, they are the new Mid-South Tag Team Champions. So this is our chance to get a little more in-depth analysis on the title victory and figure out what their plans are through the remainder of '83. For Magnum, it's quite simple. The man of few words. He wants to defend the belts alongside Duggan like they were the most prized possessions in the entire region. It's a big career milestone for him, and he's going to take advantage of every opportunity. And for Duggan, well, on top of the fact that he's given up smoking, therefore he's avoiding the cigar, he also still needs to wrap up the beef with Ted DiBiase. He says the issues between those two will not be resolved until one of them is run out of the territory. Hint, hint. It'll be significant for the upcoming Loser Leaves Town match. I can't remember where DiBiase went afterwards. Obviously, he bounced around during this Mid-South run over the next few years. Later on when it became the UWF. I think, wasn't he in Japan for a while? I know he leaves Mid-South and then comes back later in '85. The story leading up to his decision to leave, I think it mainly had to do with the road schedule, him being burnt out on all the traveling and never being home. Of course, that's all speculation. Could have been a money thing, too. I think he was just looking for a change of pace. Like, even if he was making significantly less money working for Japan over the next year or two. But, no, they're definitely going out of their way to plug the Duggan DiBiase blow-off. So from there, we go to our first TV match of the week. It's Hacksaw, Duggan, and Magnum TA in a squash with Bill Rose and Larry Hare. And you may ask yourself, who in the blue hell were Bill Rose and Larry Hare? Aside from two unknown local job guys. Well, the simple answer is they were two unknown local job guys. Both were hideously out of shape. They had very generic matching black singlets, unkempt beards, absolute jabronis. The one guy, Larry Hare, he definitely had a lot of hair. He had hair in places I didn't even know human men could grow hair. There's an epically great botch in this match where one of the jobbers completely sandbags Duggan on a back body drop attempt. Like, even the Irish McNeil fans knew the guy fucked up. There was one single guy in the crowd you could audibly hear go, "Oh." So Duggan recovered by doing exactly what you would totally expect a ring veteran to do when a job guy does not cooperate. He slammed the shit out of him with a body slam. Just wrecked the sumbitch. I mean, generally it wasn't a good match for either team. Poor Magnum tripped over himself trying to do a leapfrog at one point. Crowd was pretty quiet for a lot of it, as were Bill Watts and Boyd Pierce. I think they might have fallen asleep. The ending was pretty good, though. Magnum hits a belly-to-belly, and just to make sure the other guy does not attempt to break up the pin, Duggan just casually gets in the ring, and he creams this guy with a spear. Didn't even try to protect him. It just looked like he trucked the guy as hard as humanly possible. Not the best showcase for the new Midsouth Tag Champs. Now, what do you expect? I mean, they were wrestling Larry Hare and Bonhoeffer Treffer. Whatever the other guy's name was, I already forgot. Ain't nothing good coming out of that. Nor did anything good come out of Mr. Wrestling 2 versus Boris Zurkov. Who in their right mind thought that was a good idea? Do we immediately point the finger of blame on Grizzly Smith, the matchmaker? I'm partly embellishing to make a point. It certainly was not a good match, but it was not horrible. Zurkov got totally blown up in the last few minutes. Mostly just a showcase squash to give to a wrestling win. I could probably say a TV win. I think we addressed it last time, although I can't remember off the top of my head. Did we mention that 2 had won the national heavyweight title in Georgia a while back? Because he had the belt around his waist here at the start. I don't remember if the announcers ever brought that up. I also don't think he was defending the belt here, but I did want to make note of it. I also made note of a really obscure conversation that Watts mentioned about the referees in Mid-South. Somehow he had gotten on the subject of talking about assigning multiple referees for Mid-South matches. I guess the idea being that because Mid-South was known for its chaotic, heavy angle-driven matches, well, why wouldn't you just assign 2 officials to take part in high-stakes matches? That way you guarantee that one referee could be on the floor catching any attempted outside interference. I mean, it was a valid point. I have no idea what spawned the conversation. It was quite random. Definitely more noteworthy than the action. I'll say that. 2 eventually won with a running knee lift. And then we got an awesome segment. So last week on Mid-South, which we unfortunately didn't review. They booked a tag match with Dr. Death, Steve Williams, and Johnny Rich against King Kong Bundy and Ted DiBiase. And there was some tomfoolery at play in the finish decision there. So Bundy's here to set the record straight with Reeser Bowden. He wants the world to see the footage firsthand to let us know that he was robbed, cheated, and screwed. And of course, had to be said every time, the way Reeser Bowden sells everything facially, there's this giant fucking madman standing right next to him, hollering into a microphone as loud as humanly possible. Reeser Bowden, totally calm, cool, and collected. Just standing there like, yep, I believe you, Bundy. That was some major-ass bullshit that took place the other week. So, in fact, we see the tape, and basically what happened was Bundy's in there brawling with Dr. Death, and somehow it breaks down where DiBiase and Rich get involved. There's a double team spot in the corner where they throw Bundy into DiBiase, who takes a bump off the apron. And then Dr. Death hits a very sloppy-looking Oklahoma Stampede, which, well, initially, Bundy's shoulders are counted down for a 3. But you see, Johnny Martinez had to wave it off. Although I don't believe the match continued. I think they just determined that was the finish. So, well, clearly Bundy's got a chip on his shoulder now. It is the first time we've seen him pinned on Mid-South television. And it comes at the expense of a huge technicality. So Bundy's flipping his lid more, saying, you could have driven a freight train through the ring mat in his right shoulder. He, oh, this is pretty funny. He kept referring to Mid-South fans and management as jackals. He says that all these jackals saw what happened, and Mid-South needs to reverse that decision and make things right. Elsewise, Bundy's going to take matter into his own hands. He's got money, damn it. And again, Reeser Bowden, totally chill. Giving us that classic eyebrow raise just to let us know, ain't he a character? Sure is, Reeser. He sure is. So then we have a special challenge match. King Kong Bundy versus Dr. Death Steve Williams. It is Godzilla meets King Kong. Almost literally speaking. And, well, let's just get the obvious out of the way. This is not how you say a technical masterwork of exquisite pro wrestling fundamentals. This was two big lumbering meatheads going at it and trying to knock the other off their feet. Obviously, you know what you're getting with Dr. Death at this point in 83. He was very raw, very green. He fucked up a lot of stuff in this match, including a leg pick spot where he just flat out missed Bundy's knee. I don't even know how that's humanly possible. They tried to implement a story where Steve went after Bundy's leg to catch him off balance, although it really didn't play much into the finish. It was just sort of a thing that happened in the match. The turning point, however, was when Bundy gave Dr. Death the avalanche splash. And because Bundy's gimmick is that he only wins his matches via 5 counts, when Steve kicked out at 4, it threw Bundy for a loop. So they do a couple near falls, and then Boris Zirkov hit the ring for the DQ, at which point Dr. Death basically fights off all the heels by himself with a series of football tackles. And when I say all the heels, I mean 2. It's funny, though, because the crowd really wanted Duggan at the end. But they also really wanted to put over Steve as a badass. So he had to basically fend off the heels by himself to make it work. So the fans did not get Duggan. All in all, they accomplished what they needed to. Crowd's already super behind Dr. Death. And he's only really been around full-time for maybe a month. Remember, he'd been in and out of the territory during football season. So the crowd really only saw him in the area for a few months back in '82 before he disappeared again. So this is really their first look at Dr. Death on a consistent week-by-week basis. Again, he's still learning the ropes, figuratively speaking. But when you consider where he wound up in his career versus where he started, it's a considerable amount of progress in a short window. And he's already massively over as a babyface. And that brings us to the low point of the show for me. Now, if you follow my world-class reviews on the channel, it is no secret I would not classify myself as a Missing Link fan. I never understood the appeal of the gimmick. I thought the guy's work was the shits. And it really hindered my enjoyment of a lot of those Dallas main events. God, especially when they had Link interacting with the Von Erichs and working those god-awful matches alongside Killer Khan, whose work I also hated. I believe this was his official debut under the Missing Link gimmick. I knew that Dewey Robertson worked in Midsouth before going to Dallas later on and working the same gimmick there. I just couldn't recall if they had already debuted the Missing Link character anywhere else. But I'm pretty sure this is where Dewey started it. And, all the mannerisms were present here. The face paint looked a little different. I think he had a little more eye makeup on later when he tried to look more crazy and wild. Haircut was pretty much the same. The whole thing only went like 2 minutes. So it's not like he had enough time to totally stink the joint up. They were a lot smarter with how they booked him in Mid-South. Let's not give the guy 15 minutes like we did in World Class. Much better idea. The best part of the entire thing was Watts' comment about Link's conditioning. And he was in really good shape. I will give him that. He had a very good physique. But just the tone and the way Watts delivered it, he goes, Missing Link's conditioning looks great. Bill Racky, not so much. A giant blatant middle finger. But he was still right. So Link eventually went over with some kind of modified camel clutch. Bill Ratsky's man tits are jiggling all over the place. God, they really needed a sensor bar up during that thing. I'm not entirely sure if I could call this debut a success. Mainly that nobody really reacted to anything the Missing Link did. Watts tried to claim they were still buzzing over the fight with Dr. Death and Bundy from the previous segment. My claim is that the gimmick sucked and nobody cared about it. Just like nobody cared about it in Dallas either. But maybe that's just me. Having watched plenty of Missing Link footage in the last year or two. Then we came back for another short squash. This time we had Hacksaw Butch Reed going over Ken Johnson in a couple minutes. Fun little showcase. Really not much to say about it. Reed hit a delayed military press on Ken and got the pinfall. And that left a little remaining TV time for this standby match with Rip Rogers and Doug Vines against Art Cruz and Tim Horner. Breaking out that old Vince terminology here. A seesaw back and forth bout. Kind of interesting with the format here. They actually had Horner as the babyface in peril so Cruz could get the hot tag. And Cruz actually made a solid little fiery comeback. Even though it was very abrupt. Didn't get a conclusive finish, though. It's always fun when they boil it down to the wire, because you never actually know if they're going to sneak in a finish with the last 3 or 4 seconds. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But yeah, not much to really cover with that one either. Tim Horner's mustache is still creepy as fuck. I don't care what anybody says. Nobody looks good with a plain mustache. But Tim Horner in particular, God, he just looked weird. I mean, most of the show this week was centered around the Dr. Death Bundy angle, but they did address the previous title changes as well. Set up some big things with DiBiase and Duggan for down the road. Not really what I would call the greatest show from start to finish, but they had some moments. I am not looking forward to more missing link matches, but hey, you can't win them all, brother. I wasn't a fan of all the Mid-South segments from 83 to 84. It was a hot period, most definitely, but it still had its bumps in the road. More bumps than most of World Class's booking in 85. See what I did there? Going for those seamless transitions into the next portion of the podcast. So yeah, lather, rinse, repeat my opening talking points. We missed a couple episodes of World Class. Of course, with a lot of these episodes, I mean, you could skip over a handful of them. You're really not missing out on a whole lot. We did miss Brian Adias becoming the new Texas Heavyweight Champion. So like I said, we really didn't miss out on a whole lot in the last couple weeks. They showed some highlights of that bout. It was 2 out of 3 falls, taped from Fort Worth. So Mark Lorenz was doing commentary. He was still Mark Lorenz. Enthusiasm was not that man's forte when it came to announcing. A lot of the film they showed basically centered around the third fall. They were both tied at 1 apiece. The story they had going in was that Gino Hernandez was working over Adias' arm. And then he pulled out the upset miracle of a lifetime in the last few seconds when he caught Gino with a small package and pinned him. Best part of the whole thing was them putting the camera on Gino afterwards, completely overselling the loss by pounding on the ring mat like a spoiled toddler. It was so over the top and so campy. And Adias did a great job rubbing it in afterwards by looking at the camera and telling Gino that he is now his Texas Heavyweight Champion. He also pointed out how Gino may have been watching the promo in the locker room, even though we literally just saw Gino pounding the ring mat 3 seconds prior. So apparently this promo happened later in the taping block. But of course, they had to give the heels some of their heat back here. So outrun Gino and Krista beat up Adias from behind. Ended up trying to cuff him to the ring ropes to keep the onslaught going. But Kerry Von Erich ends up chasing him to the back. The attack itself was pretty fast. It looked like they were trying to cut Brian Adias' hair when they went to tie him up in the ropes. But Lorenz never drew attention to scissors. So I'm not exactly sure what they were attempting to do. Again, though, pretty simple little heat angle. Brian Adias as the new Texas Heavyweight Champ? Nah. It's whatever. I mean, I'm not really a Brian Adias fan, but he was definitely popular amongst the Texas fans. So I cannot knock the title change. That was followed with a fun little pre-tape featuring Bill Mercer and Gary Hart. As always, Mercer is just phenomenal with the subtle rebuttals. He begins his interview outside Gary's office in Dallas by referencing the press media he hosted when Gary challenged the Von Erichs to put their 6-man belts on the line, saying he has not got a chance to interview Gary since that point. Of course, Gary's like, well, you saw fit not to show up. To which Bill immediately retorts with, well, you didn't invite me. This is why you don't script promos in wrestling. For moments like that. So the premise here is that Mark Lewin's been at the helm of some controversy in Dallas. He had already been banned from the United States on several occasions in storyline. However, Gary was able to pull some strings and allow him to enter the country to wrestle. And the issue is that Lewin's been using a sleeper hold as his finish, but he has not been properly assisting his opponents after he puts them out. It's sort of a cardinal rule in wrestling. You are supposed to revive your opponent after you choke him out. But Mark Lewin's been avoiding that. Unsportsmanlike. However, Gary assures us that he's been responsible for waking his opponents up. There's no issue at hand. Even this alleged bullshit about Lewin putting his hands on Bronco Lubitsch on a recent Dallas taping. So I presume we take Gary's word for it, right? It's all good in the hood, to coin a famous phrase. There is nothing rotten in Denmark. You can always believe a trustworthy guy like Gary Hart, as we all know from history. So then we had Killer Tim Brooks squaring up with the Great Kabuki. Obviously we had Gary in Brooks' corner and Sunshine in Kabuki's. No, I do not have an explanation for Sunshine wearing what appeared to be a wedding dress in this segment. We actually got a special guest commentator here. World-class chaplain, Gary Holder. The same guy that wrote the book on David Von Erich's passing the previous year. I'm not exactly sure what the title means in the context of representing world-class championship wrestling. I assume it had mostly everything to do with the book. He really wasn't much of a voice for the action, though. A lot of his commentary involved him drooling over Sunshine the entire time. It started off moderately tame and then grew more unsettling as he kept mentioning her. Maybe it was a sundress that turned him on. I don't know. All in all, the match is okay. Very long and not very exciting the whole way through. I don't know how hot it was in the Sportatorium, but I'm looking around at all the guys involved here. They were sweating profusely by the end of this thing. Fucking Gary Hart's out there in a tracksuit. I'm like, are you crazy, dude? It had to have been 90 degrees in that building. At the least. But they fought through the humidity. Killer Brooks ended up missing a big leg drop from the middle rope. Actually, they did the exact same finish here as they did in the Gino Bryan to Diaz match. Kabuki just stacked up Brooks in a small package and pinned him. That must have been the go-to favorite finish of the week. Small package cradle. And we also had the afterbirth where Brooks went after Kabuki to try to take him out. Mainly serving as a distraction spot so Mark Lewin could sneak up and attack Kabuki from behind. But it also failed, as Kabuki spat green mist in the general direction of Mark Lewin. Lewin sold it like he was a bumbling 1950s cartoon villain. And then he fell out to the ring apron while Brooks and Hart pulled him to the floor. I'm not exactly sure what Lewin was screaming at the end of this thing. All I heard was him using the word Ritz over and over again. So apparently he was very fond of crackers. Actually, I'm thinking about it now. Did they not just copy and paste the exact same segment and angle from the Diaz Gino segment? It was the exact same thing. Like almost move for move. God, how uncreative can we really get with the booking here, guys? Babyface wins via small package. Heel attempts to beat the babyface down afterwards. Babyface runs wild and makes his own comeback. Heels are sent packing. Guess Ken Mantell really wasn't stewing for grand ideas this week. But staying on the subject of Gary Hart and his pack of monster goons, apparently they shot an angle the other week where the Iceman got beat up by the entire crew. He said that he got 500 pounds dropped across him like a sack of potatoes. I presume he was talking about the one-man gang. I'm like, positive gang was nowhere near 500 pounds. Maybe 375 at the most. 500? Little excessive there, brother. But he's here to lay out his revenge plan. First, he refers to Hart's group as fools. He also called them suckers a few times. But fools seem to be the go-to line. He said starting tomorrow, he'll be on the corner and he'll be packed. If you know what I'm saying. No. No, Iceman, I have no idea what the fuck you're talking about. I've never heard that phrase in my entire life. But he vows revenge. And we know if the Iceman's vowing to lay at thee smacketh down on his opponents, you know he be serious. 'Cause it gots to be that way sometimes. And then we had the main event of Gino Hernandez and Kerry Von Erich, where we were told that if anybody tried to interfere, their designated cornermen would be disqualified. And I know what you're all thinking. I've said it a billion times when we've been doing these reviews. If you're going to threaten to disqualify the cornermen because of presumptive interference, why not just ban them from ringside to avoid the problem? The answer is pro wrestling makes no sense. It is an easy solution, though. By all accounts, Chris Adams and Kevin Von Erich did not need to be out there. Probably could have just made it a tag match at that point, avoid the issue altogether. I did laugh getting to hear Chris Adams scold a couple fans in the front row. Exact quote. He goes, "Why don't you sit down, you foreigner?" Foreigner. Them's fighting words in Texas, boy. So these two had a very grassroots sportatorium main event. The last few minutes were pretty great. I'll talk about that in a sec. But you had some involvement with Kevin and Chris on the floor. Kerry got dumped out so Chris could try to go after him with a couple of cheap shots. But Kevin ended up cutting him off. Bronco Lubitsch was also out there, basically serving as an enforcer. It did completely defy all logic of the stipulations they literally just laid out, where Rick Hazard made it abundantly clear that if any outside party interferes, the match would be thrown out. Meanwhile, Chris interferes right in front of Rick fucking Hazard. Match continues. But Kerry made a small comeback. He had the match won toward the end. But we get this awesome deal where Gino reaches into his trunks, tries to throw powder at Kerry's face, but he ends up hitting Rick instead. And the spot's hilarious because after Gino realizes that he fucked up and he sees Kerry stalking him, Gino then tries to stick the powder back into his trunks, as if he was trying to conceal the powder that he is now sprawled out all over the ring mat and Rick Hazard's face. Epic heel move. Pleading innocence even when you're caught red-handed. So by that point, Chris and Kevin hit the ring to basically throw out the match. Everybody's going after each other while Hazard's being completely ignored. He's been blinded by this powder substance. Nobody's in any hurry to help the guy. Fans don't give a shit. I mean, they were just glad Gino got disqualified for the use of the powder. But, I mean, it was a hot close to the show. Definitely more angle-driven than anything. That was kind of the central story for the week. Angles, and more angles. Not to say it was a bad thing. It had more Mid-South qualities to it, which is always a positive. Again, though, it really doesn't seem like a whole lot has happened in the last couple weeks. I mean, the Adidas title change is new, but I think we already knew about the six-man titles changing hands a while back. Yeah, really, nothing new has developed in the last few weeks. The Iceman's still pissed at Gary Hart. Gino and Chris are still entangled with all the Von Erich stuff. Telling you, man, this show moves at a glacial pace sometimes. I mean, I'm all for slow burn build and milking the big payoffs. But man, sometimes you watch these world-class shows and you're like, are we ever going to get a payoff to half this stuff? Star Wars was not too far removed from this taping block. And a lot of the feuds that bled into that show are still being continued. Well, we will see what the end game is. But that was our big return to world-class television after 3 weeks. Return to status quo booking. But there y'all have it. So thanks everybody for tuning in for this Friday show. We will be back to a normal road schedule going forward here, so make sure you stop back on Mondays and Fridays to check out all the new shows and all the updates on the coverage we're doing. Thanks everybody, and take care. Peace out.